I used to work on the North Slope of Alaska in the oil industry. The work we were doing required us to travel far out into the Alaskan Petroleum Reserve, which is basically just untamed tundra wilderness for hundreds of miles. The oil companies would build these long ice roads in the winter that would lead to exploration drilling pads. Our job was to go out after they finished the initial drilling and test the rock formations for their oil production qualities. It was mid-January. The sun hadn't quite come up yet. And when I say it hadn't come up yet, I mean almost a month and a half. Polar nights are intense. The particular well site we were traveling to was about 60 miles west of the Alpine, deep in the wilderness. Our job took about a week, but we finished and we were headed back to camp to finish our hitch and go home. At the beginning and the end of the ice roads are guard shacks, and you have to check in and check out for safety. No cell reception, and the radios work only up to a distance. If you don't check in or out in a set time, they come looking for you to ensure you're not a popsicle. It was about 4 in the morning, not that it really mattered in the land of endless night. But we were halfway across the ice road. Travel was slow as the speed limit on these roads was only about 25 miles per hour. When something appeared in the road in our headlights. It was a man in jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie jacket, walking down the ice road in wilderness tundra at 4 a.m. and negative 20 degrees outside. It's not unusual for these local Inuit people to be out this far hunting. Maybe his snowmobile broke down or he's trying to just get back to the guard shack. Seemed plausible. He didn't acknowledge us as our trucks rolled up on him. He just kept shuffling forward. He didn't seem cold. His clothes, while totally not appropriate for these extreme weathers, appeared warm and dry. We also noticed that he wasn't Inuit, but Caucasian. I rolled down my window and asked if he needed any help and if he was okay. He still didn't acknowledge us, just kept shuffling forward. His face was completely blank, devoid of any thought or emotions. The other guys in my truck suggested that maybe he was in an accident and in shock. I continued rolling my truck alongside him as he trudged down the road, and still trying to get his attention. Even in this extreme cold, I could occasionally get whiffs of a particular smell coming off of him. He smelled acidic, if that makes sense. There was just a lot about this guy that just made the hair on my neck stand up. The guy behind me in the truck's crew cab had enough of all of this. He rolled down the window and reached out to grab the guy. He later said that he was just going to try to shake him out of his stupor. Before my buddy's hand could even reach him, this walking popsicle spun around and latched onto my buddy's outstretched arm. He glared at my buddy and then at me with this look of pure rage, not removing his hand from his arm. If emotions had a physical temperature, this guy could have melted the entire tundra that night. My buddy groaned in pain as he tried to get his arm free from Mr. Popsicle. At this moment, this guy started screaming in our faces. There was so much hate and rage and anger in this scream. It was absolutely terrifying. I slammed on the gas and spun out in the ice before the wheels caught and launched us forward. Popsicle Dude was still a hold of my buddy's arm and was trying to pull him out of the truck. He was running alongside the truck while the other guys in the cab held onto my buddy to try to keep him inside. After several moments, it could have only been a few seconds at most, my buddy tore free from this guy and we hauled ass to the guard shack another 30 miles down the road. We checked in with the guards and reported what we had just seen. The guard was looking at us like we were pulling a prank, but policy said they had to check it out regardless. My buddy's arm was sore, and when he pulled back his sleeve, there were noticeable bruisings in the shape of a hand around his arm. We filed a report with the guards and were told to head back to our camp. None of us really wanted to talk about what happened, and it was a quiet drive the rest of the way. We flew home the next day. The next time we saw the guard at this shack, we asked him if he saw that Mr. Popsicle on his patrols. He told us that he searched up and down that ice road for a solid 12-hour shift and saw nothing, not even tracks in the snow leading off of the road. He told us it was a good prank and that he'd get us back for making him waste his shift driving around. But it wasn't a prank. Who would have made up a story like that? And who would willingly bruise their arm for a dumb prank? We never got a satisfying answer to what happened that evening. I still wonder about that dude, if he even was a dude. The Alaskan tundra is a weird place, and that was just one of many of my weird stories from my time up there. I'll work to write down more of my experiences and share them to the appropriate subs. I live pretty far away from anyone and mostly surrounded by the forest. I hunt regularly and spend a lot of time outside when not running my business. But it was early during the hunting season and around 3 a.m. I was tracking deer prints and they just stopped, and an uneasy feeling filled me as something compelled me to look up. In the tree was a deer, or what was left of it. It was gutted, but not like how a human hunter would have. So I decided to just call it there and headed back. As I was making my way to my truck, I still felt uneasy and as if I was being watched. I would periodically look back and check with my nods and caught two very big and very high up eyes looking back, followed by a type of deer yell. Not a roar or a scream, but a yell. It didn't sound like a bear or a big cat, but like a big man, a very big man. I took off running and didn't look back. It was a 4-mile run back to my truck, and I didn't stop once. When I made it back and drove off, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw again something standing silhouetted by the sunrise. When I made it home, I was still shaken up a little bit and decided to look over at my truck. Now I'm a fairly big guy, standing 6'6" and weighing about, if I had to say, 230 pounds. And there were handprints bigger than my hands on my truck. Doing some more investigating, I checked my trail cams and found several offline, and one pointed at the deer that hung up in the tree. Now, being someone who's seen a lot of horror movies, and being one to not mess up with something I can't understand, I never went back to that part of the woods, and eventually decided to move altogether, as at night, I would hear that yell in my dreams. Sometimes my wife would tell me that she felt like someone was watching her from the tree line as well, and being a new parent, I didn't want to take any chances. This happened to me a few years ago during winter. I live near a lake, more of a pond really. But this isn't a post debating logistics of what makes a lake a lake. Right up the road is a small hill that leads up to a hiking trail. I know this trail like the back of my hand. One night, I decided to go on a hike. It had just snowed, and there was a full moon, and like a Disney princess, the cold never bothered me anyway. It was a little slippery going up the hill. The trail was a little bit buried under the snow, but it's a full circle, so it's impossible to get lost. I got going and finally made it to the part of the trail where it's covered by trees, but being wintertime, it more resembles bony hands reaching towards the heavens. This is when I saw it. I saw a silver light shining in the distance. The way it moved, I assured it was some type of trash caught in a tree. But the closer I got, the more it began to take shape. I got about 500 to 600 feet away when I saw it was a woman. She was in a silver dress, a real fancy looking one. It's definitely not something that anyone would wear in this type of weather. As I got close, I could see she looked like she was crying. I assumed she was lost in some type of danger. I called out to her, but she paid me no attention. I began to walk closer to her, and as I did, she began to walk toward the lake. It's a pretty steep drop off that lake from where she was. I began to run after her to see if I could help, but by the time I reached her, or where she was, there was nothing or no one around. I look all around and even climbed down where she would have fallen, but nothing. Not even prints in the snow, except for mine. By the time it dawned on me, there was no trace of her even being here. I heard a scream like nothing I have ever heard before. I look up to see the woman just walking on the water. It may have snowed, but it definitely wasn't cold enough for this lake to freeze. I stood there frozen in fear as it dawned on me what I was seeing. She let out one more scream before sinking under the lake. I hightailed it back to the trail and back to my home in record time. I'm not even sure what I just saw. I don't even know if it was real. I've never gone back at night hiking, and even now, I never go alone, even in the day. My grandpa was born in the last years of the 19th century and spent his entire life in rural Idaho as a farmer and rancher. He had tons of old cowboy stories he would tell us grandkids. Most of them were funny, some of them were cautionary, but a few were just downright creepy. When my grandpa was 6 years old, he, along with his older brother and gang of kids from nearby farms, decided to go ice skating for the day. At that time, my great-grandpa was working as a ranch hand, and the family lived near Chesterfield, Idaho, now mostly a ghost town. It was a bright and sunny January day in 1902, and though the temperature was low, the sun kept things somewhat warm. They had hitched sleighs to their horses and headed down to the Porterneuf River to ice skate. There were 8 kids altogether, and they were excited to show off their new skates from Christmas. Along with my grandpa and his brother, there were 3 Robinson kids, Tommy Bayer, and the Gooch twins. The best spot to skate was next door to the Gooch's ranch. The river was broad and shallow, so the ice tended to get thicker, and if they did fall through, they would just get their legs wet. The kids spent a couple hours skating when a loud scream came from the willow bush on the riverbank opposite of them. The kids could only watch as a giant man, covered head and toe with thick black fur, came lumbering out of the bushes. It was carrying a large tree branch and was screaming in rage at the kids. They fled towards their sleighs, trying to scramble up the riverbank in their skates. My grandpa, being the youngest one, was at the back of the rush. He couldn't get a good foothold because of the skates and fell back towards the ice. The giant was now crossing the river towards them, screaming and swinging his tree branch. My grandpa was sure that this creature was going to eat him. As my grandpa tells it, Lady Luck smiled down to me on that day by the river, because as the giant was midway across the river, the ice gave way. It only submerged its shins, but was slowed down considerably as it tried to get up, back on top of the ice. This gave my grandpa's brother enough time to jump down and cut the laces of my grandpa's skates. They left the skates and dashed back up the riverbank and jumped onto the sleigh. As they looked back, the giant man was cresting the riverbank. To their relief, it didn't chase the sleighs. It just stood there, hollering at the kids and swinging its tree branch. The kids were able to make it back to the Gooch Ranch, where they told their encounter to John Gooch, the twins' grandfather. Word spread quickly in the tiny farming community, and soon a posse was formed to hunt down the beast. Where the kids had been skating, there was found footprints almost 2 feet in length. My grandpa's skates were also found near the tracks. They had both been bent in half like a horseshoe. The tracks headed west into a nearby mountain range. The posse followed them as far as they could, but the deep snow prevented them from traveling further. The creature was never sighted in that area again. The story captivated a small community, and soon word traveled across the country, known as the Idaho wildman. That spring, my great-grandfather decided to buy a ranch in the Little Lost River Valley, farther north in Idaho. My grandpa had many other weird and creepy backwoods stories, but he always said that this encounter frightened him the most. He was sure he would have been killed if the giant hadn't broken through that ice and given his brother a chance to cut his laces. Hello everyone. I wanted to say thank you for watching and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did and you would like to see more of these, make sure to like, comment, and if you're new to this channel, make sure to subscribe. We're doing nothing but growing. And if you would like to, become a channel member today. There's going to be a lot of bonus content, including like extra stories, creepier stories that a lot of people wouldn't like because of how intense it gets. And also bloopers, because you guys aren't going to want to miss the amount of times I mess up in stories, especially with one of the stories that are in this video. I'm not going to name which one, but I guess you can kind of assume which one. Also, make sure to check out the links in my description as well, like my Twitter, Instagram, and my Gmail if you would like to submit a story. I would love to tell some subscriber stories, so make sure to drop them there. There's going to be a lot more content and a lot more coming, just know that. But other than that, stay safe, stay scary, and I'll see you in the next one. I laughed for like 3 or 5 minutes at one of those stories. That sounds really messed up, but I guess you guys could kind of figure out which one. But it was still a good story. Okay, I'm gonna shut up now. Okay, love you, bye.